Hi, this is Paul. I want to talk about Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand's conversation. I don't know why it's entitled Everything is Meaningless on the thumbnail. It was a very interesting conversation for a lot of different reasons. And Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand have been talking to each other for a little while now, and both of them have been sort of moving targets, especially Russell Brand with his embrace of, if you know what church Russell Brand goes to, just put it down below. He's not on YouTube much anymore. He's on Rumble or some such like that. So he doesn't run across my radar screen too often, but I listened to this and I listened to the Daily Wire exclusive, which was also good. And let's take a look at some parts of it. Okay, this is right after he stops talking about the Canadian politician that he thinks is going to be the next prime minister.
Now, you've been down, I've got two questions for you that I want to go in two directions. The first is regarding the question I opened our conversation with in relationship to Christianity. You're a very open person and your interests flash all over. And do you have any faith in the stability of what you've newly found, or do you think that there's a risk or a possibility of your attention?
I thought I was going to let this run for a while, but I can't help myself. One of the things that has been interesting to watch over the last 7 years has been this question of stability. And Jordan's question, I don't know that Jonathan Peugeot and I have changed a lot. I think I've grown. Certainly there have been some things that have changed. But one of the things that I thought of quite a bit when I was just in Europe, and so I first went to Ireland and had my conversation with Paul Kingsnorth, spent a lot of time with Martin Shaw, and then I was at ARC and spent a lot of time with a number of people. But after that, with all the estuary work in the Netherlands and Germany and the UK, and just having much smaller sessions to talk to people and hear much more of their lives, one of the things that embracing Christianity does is bring stability. That I see so clearly in the lives of a lot of people. They're sort of flailing about, and then once they sort of embrace Christianity, give their lives to Christ, join a church, it sort of settles them down, and the pace of change in their life is nowhere near as frenetic. And I think, obviously, given a guy like Russell Brand, who is an outlier on how many different scales, that's a very good question.
Given your open nature, shifting to something else? Or do you feel that you found a kind of bedrock that's qualitatively different from the sorts of orientations that you've had previously? So let's start with that.
It feels like something absolute has been encountered, which has ameliorated, mitigated, neutralized, and somehow compounded and infused.
Now, Russell Brand still talks the way he does. But again, maybe, as I said before with respect to Jordan Hall, once Jordan Hall became a Christian, I could understand him a lot better. Now, maybe because, well, Jordan Hall doesn't really speak in Christianese. Russell Brand has a degree of Christianese here. But again, Russell Brand seems to make a lot more sense. Now, someone from the outside would say, well, of course he makes more sense. He's closer within your worldview than he was before. And yeah, that's fair enough. But he's still astoundingly articulate. And, you know, part of what's been interesting, so I have a lot to do in March, and I have a ton of people after the trip who want to talk to me. So please be patient with me, those of you that I said I'll talk to you soon, and to get back to me in March, because March, April, May, June, it's all going to go by fast. So Rafe Kelly, after Jordan's closing speech at ARC, made some observations to me about why he thinks Jordan is struggling in some of these speeches. And again, I'm not questioning sort of the content. It's much more the rhetoric that Jordan, I think, has really been struggling rhetorically. And I think part of it is that he has been taking in and trying to integrate and synthesize so much biblical material. I think it's sort of the stuff that we had from him when we first met him in 16, 17, 18, that had been the product of decades of synthesis and a whole lot of engagement with regular people in the classroom and as a clinical psychologist. That he, of course, hierarchy, spined and blind. Now he spends the vast majority of his time talking probably with truly exceptional people like Russell Brand. I mean, all the kinds of people that you see on his channel are very exceptional people. And so to learn how to handle the Bible with and talk about it with ordinary people, which I think he really did well in the Genesis series, he's sort of not doing real well with that. Now he's turning to the Bible again and again, and many of his speeches are just filled with the Bible, but part of what, especially homiletics, is you're always connecting two worlds. And what he did very early on very well was sort of connect with very ordinary people, again, based on his experience in the classroom and as a clinical psychologist. And all those stories have gotten old now to a degree. And because he's been living at a very different level, he hasn't really been able to connect in the way that he could connect with so much freshness, let's say, early on. And the longer he goes dealing with elites at a certain level, I think he is going to, in increasing measure, struggle, especially to try to communicate the Bible to ordinary people. Now, one of the things that you notice is that now he's on voluntary self-sacrifice, and you'll hear that said again and again and again and again and again in this talk. Russell Brand, however, has always had a fluency and a fluidity that is remarkable, and it's lyrical. And what Russell Brand has seemed to have done is sort of take this fluency and fluidity and connect it with, clearly, he's been listening to a lot of Protestant preaching. And he's also been reading C.S. Lewis. Now, Russell Brand is clearly a very intelligent man, and he's very quick. And now I know some of you say, I don't know how much I trust him, and fair enough. The Bible itself says, don't give young believers too much authority too quickly. And as I noted in part of my conversation and my Ken Dobson conversation, is that I think part of what the church in the seeker movement and in the church planting era, and in a case of someone like Mark Driscoll, is you gave someone with a lot of natural ability and a lot of intelligence probably more power and authority than his maturity level warranted. And for that reason, he ran aground in a variety of ways. Now, Russell Brand is older, and that helps. But Russell Brand seems to have been able to synthesize and accommodate, and he's able to sort of wield his newfound Christian ideas and language in a more coherent way that connects better than Jordan. Partly because I think Jordan is breaking new ground, or trying to break new ground, at least for him, and I think in some ways for all of us in the midst of this epistemic revolution. And Brand is mostly feeding from Christian ministers who already have, in a sense, Brand is already taking, now when I say baby food, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, because that's not what I mean from Christian ministers, but something that's already been processed so that it's, the nutrients are all right there and it's easily digestible. And Russell Brand can sort of take that and put that into his matrix. And that's what Russell does. Whereas Jordan is trying to find new things, and the homiletical language isn't there. Now he's got some, voluntary self-sacrifice. Okay, fair enough. If you have that one idea for a sermon, that sermon is going to be 90% illustration and 1% sort of nugget that you want to diffuse. You think about chocolate. If you ever get, really pure chocolate, that's not what you get when you eat a chocolate bar. That pure chocolate is added with sugar and with milk to sort of bring the flavor out of the chocolate, so that when you taste it, it's good for the palate. So Jordan's trying to take the pure stuff and put it on people, and it's bracing, whereas Russell sort of has all of this other stuff going, and he's already taking sort of the sugar and the milk and the little bits of chocolate, and it's already been processed by his pastor. And then you throw that sort of into the Russell Brand flow and lyrical flow, and out it comes. And I think that's partly why this whole conversation, Jordan, again, just seems awkward and struggling. And that's what how Jordan looked on stage at Ark. I mean, instead of sort of like he used to do, picking one person in the front row and talking to that one person. And I think what that did, Rafe noticed that for me. Part of what that did, I think it helped Jordan process in a way towards a human being. Instead, we watch him, just look at the video. He's struggling, he's closing his eyes. He's all up here in the theoretical, instead of, no, you have to talk to a person. You have to deliver this to a person. And anyway, let's go. I'm going to try and let Russell do his flow thing. And because the two things I got out of this video were the flow and how fluid Russell is. And, this point that he makes about the self is a really important one. And to me, this shows that he, again, unlike Jordan, I think Russell Brand is under the guidance of some Christian ministers who are speaking into his life, and he's listening. And Jordan continues to sort of be outside. Now he's talking to, Bishop Barron, but he's not under the care of a church. And so for Jordan, this wrestling he's doing with the Bible and with Christianity, it's all sort of up here, and it's not necessarily applied. Now his wife, she's working on applying it, and I think his daughter's in church, and she married an evangelical, so they're applying it. But Jordan, it's just sort of signs of a degree of theoretical constipation, and it's a terrible metaphor to use, I know, but Russell is flowing.
Something that was...
Or do you feel that you found a kind of bedrock that's qualitatively different from the sorts of orientations that you've had previously? So let's start with that.
It feels like something absolute has been encountered, which has ameliorated, mitigated, neutralized, and somehow compounded and infused something that was always latent and yet corroming within me. The self as the absolute. I want this.
Right.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And the problem with the New Age, the problem with I'll have a little bit of Buddhism and I'll have a little bit of Sufism and I'll read a bit of Foucault and I'll conjure up my own little pantheon. In fact, it was you that said it to me, that if God is is everything, God is anything. And I encountered that more empirically when returning to a kind of New Age festival. And I thought, what is this feeling that I'm having here, having, since coming to Christ in a New Age festival? And I've still got the other deities adorned permanently about my body as a reminder. And what it felt like is it's false.
Okay. What he says here is so important and so key to this transformation that he has clearly begun. He noticed that in New Ageism, that the spiritual religious consumer, now when he says the self, part of the difficulty with the word self is that it means so many different things in so many different ways. Now, he's using self sort of as, let's say, the ego, and I'm not using this, let's say, in technical Freudian language, the ego, the id, sort of his center of will. He noticed that his center of will now, and this is exactly right in terms of his conversion, his center of will is being displaced. He is taking off, as Paul says in the New Testament, the old self and putting on the new self. Christ is giving him a new self. And he's still got a lot of ego because he's like, okay, there's only one Christ and I'm not him, so I'm going to be Paul. It's like, why don't you just be Russell? Why don't you just be Russell? But again, when I listen to him, I think he is teachable. And he's got some pastors in his life, and he's learning from them. And I'm seeing spiritual growth from previous conversations with Jordan.
Idolatry, false idolatry is predicated on a polarity between the self and the idol. Christ replaces the self. Mm-hmm. You die on the cross with him. It's the self that has to go. There is
what self exactly? How do you conceptualize the self that has to go?
The Russellness, the observer, the witness, the Russellness. By default, inadvertently, I'm always in the service of the centrifugal force around which urges, projections, reflections, the intellect, the memory, they all, like you once said when talking about like the word witch might have a bunch of associated words like cat and cauldron and all that. I got Russell and Russell's memories and projections. I got this sort of loose sense of a continuum of self. Now, it was very deliberate.
And that center should be replaced.
Yes, he said before he was right, and we nearly touched upon this before, because W.B. Yeats was right. The centre cannot hold, and that's what we're experiencing with the emergence of the Hydra. The sovereign is unfolding. The seed is cracking open. The wheat is being born. It's being born out now. The thing is before, with the narcissism, me being a devotee of the other culture, a devotee of the false idolatry, I worshipped self. Mm-hmm. Now, at first, it felt like the pilgrimage was very sort of meekly undertaken, for I was not a robust child athlete, nor was I a high school heartthrob. I was a sort of a broken and wounded little trickster in the world. And when I became empowered at puberty and...
He is so good. He is really good.
Attractive and potent and then famous, and it all was, I felt, evolving or growing, but one of my teachers would say inflating. It was inflating. Right. Like, it's difficult if you've felt pretty worthless your whole life and all of a sudden there's a culture queuing up to give you sort of accolades and pat you on the back, and there's a sort of an endless cortege of fellatio suddenly available. It's difficult not to think that you might not be rather magnificent. Now, the reason as a sort of a counterweight to the feelings of inferiority, I would have been I always knew something about Jesus. But my odd contemporary translation of that was, I want to be him. I want to be the saviour. I want to be in direct commune with God. I want to lead. I want to be empowered. And then when the desolation came, the desolation and despair, when the grail came again, not like the adolescent despair, when you know you've got a whole life and a bunch of hormones about to hit you and elevate you, middle-age desolation and decimation, desecration, despair, despondency, when that incursion came, when those arrows landed, there was a clarification took place amidst the catastrophic white noise and haze was not just the cross, but the solitary figure, fully man, fully God, to whom we must bow down. Now, they do all they can in the United Kingdom to make astringent, anodyne and banal the figure of Christ, the TV shows, the ceremonies and sermons themselves, with some notable exceptions. I've had some brilliant English Christian teachers, J. John, Father Dave, although he's just become a bishop and he's certainly not a Catholic minister, Father Julian at Brompton, loads of people out of the UK, so I'm not being dismissive in a wider sense, I'm just saying sort of culturally the way that Christianity is presented is somewhat mundane, and then over in this country, the United States, where we are now, sometimes they can give it so much carnival that it can seem too sequined, glistening and ridiculous. But somewhere within all of us is that he's there. He is there, for that was his gift. He died that we may know eternal life and we may be redeemed of our sins, and he bequeathed upon us the Holy Spirit. Now, what I felt was, again, it wasn't sort of flash, bang, wallop. The moment of the baptism was powerful. The moment of sort of the slowly separating fugue, and as I say, the clarification and emergence of the face of Christ was very real. And I knew what the compromise was. If there is a Jesus, you're not Jesus. You are not Jesus. You are not at the center, and neither is anybody else. He is firstborn among the dead. And the rest of us, we're all lined up before the throne as sinners. The people that have tried to...
Now, he just slipped it in there, the firstborn from among the dead. I mean, he that line he has picked up, it's from the Bible. But again, when I listen to him now, I hear someone who is... compared to the other interviews that I've had, that I've heard him in. And again, I've pretty much only heard him in, let's say, the Jordan Peterson conversations that he's had. He's had a few talks. But I see, at least from this point of view, from whatever I can tell, which is, of course, very, very limited, not like a real pastor who is in his life, but certainly looks to me like he has grown a lot.
Destroy me, the people that hate me, the people that I've wronged, the people that I've sinned against, all of us, just one congregation before him. My cherished and prized individuality, sometimes that cast me so low, worthless, disgusting, worse than everybody else, that sometimes self-reification and self-deification, I am so spectacular, I am so marvelous. All of it now just sort of eased into, I am as he made me, I am as he would have me. Now, I don't know that I might know, it'll be, for someone as you say, open, peripatetic, intellectually and capricious as I have sometimes been, perhaps it would seem audacious to claim that I belong to him, but that I surrender to you as my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, I serve you.
Yeah, well, it's something you want to do with care, that's for sure.
So surely. But
I've said this for years. This is not like buying a sensible used car. You fall in love, you give your life, you surrender, and something you want to do with care, yeah, but also abandon.
to let you know that the ego's still in here, I may have given up wanting to be Jesus Christ, but I'm going to give as best a shot as I can give at being Paul. That's I'll come down from Jesus, but only so far. Oh no, sorry, Lord. Sorry, Lord. Paul's just a man like us. Paul's just a man like us. Acts is full of men like us. Ephesians, written by a man like us. Galatians, a man like us. And now, amidst these tectonic shifts and new and emerging kings and new paradigms and new language, here he is, Christ. You know, so let's have another drink, please, because that was real life. As well, I ran with it because spontaneous. Don't stop film. Sorry.
Okay, so this, I want to take apart this idea. Two things here. I want to take apart this idea of this.
Oh, okay. Now what Jordan says again. I mean, I want to be careful with this because people get defensive for Jordan and all that stuff, and you don't have to be, because what he's about to say here in terms of narcissism and the displaced self. We'll just let him make the point because it's a great point.
Self.
Yes, sir.
And like the narcissistic self, let's say. And then I want to contrast that with this alternative self that's a consequence of the acceptance of something like voluntary self-sacrifice. And I kind of want to do that technically because I've been trying to work through the relationship between power and hedonism. So as far as I can tell, there's not much point in power apart from the sadism without hedonism, because power needs to serve desire, because why else have it? Okay, so then the question is, you might say, well, the power serves my desires. But then there's a problem there. Nietzsche pointed to this, by the way, back in the mid-1800s. He said, well, when you say my or when you say I, you're assuming some sort of a priori unity that's transcendent, that isn't self-evident, even though you think it is. So you might say, well, I want my desires to be requited, and that's a focus on me. But what you're doing is you're identifying the I or the me with the desire. And what that means inadvertently is that you're replacing I or me with the desire. And what that means is you're actually possessed by the desire.
Yeah.
And so what
And again, that's a great point that he just makes. And to, let's say, take what Russell was saying and bring it in there, okay, you need a new self. You need a new you, because if in fact all you are the sequential possessions of one whim or another, and this of course had been Russell Brand's life, there is no self. And so then that's part of the reason why before people become Christians, they often say, I'm empty inside. And the reason they're empty inside is because there's a never-ending shuffling of desires that we are perpetually empty, and we try to fill ourselves with everything around, whereas C.S. Lewis, what God is perpetually full and overflowing, and if we invite him in, he will fill us with himself. And once we are filled with himself, everything else can then find its proper place within those ordered loves. You could use that language. There's a whole variety of different languages that different traditions have used for the same point. Okay, this section.
That is what you do to some degree. If you're a reasonable parent of adolescents, for example,
Yes.
one of the things you do is say, go make some mistakes and find out for yourself.
It is required.
I suppose that's you would associate that theologically with the granting of free will. Like, right, why not make everyone just into a slave of divine command?
Yes, exactly. But what we have to do is actually, Jordan, is not pursue it, I believe, not entirely down the lines of rationalism, i.e., if you sacrifice this now, things will be better in the future, if you are cooperative with your peers, because in a sense, that's no different than the kind of evolutionary biology that comes out of Pinker and your man Dawkins and all of the atheists. Oh, we can rationally, even love, we can describe love. No, there is something that is beyond reason. There is something that is beyond our understanding, beyond our ken. Now, first we must enter into an alternative state. That state is belief. Like me, I'm pretty clever. So to sort of like go, all right, so God came to earth in human form, lived a life as a normal person with genitals and fingernails and farts and picked stuff out his teeth. Then he died because somehow there had to be absolution for sin. Somehow, I can't, even when I try to put it in rational language, some frequency had to be augured, some template, some portal, some opening, some new milieu. Something had to be done, a transition had to be achieved. I can't rationally unpack it, but when through despair, that set of that mosaic of traits and recollections and urges that I call self, when it is annihilated and when it implodes, when that becomes inutil, who is there amidst the archetypal morass and miasma? Is there some form, some figure? Now, if I believe in him, if I go, Jesus Christ, you are my King and my Lord and my Savior, something happens. So I believe we have to go beyond, like, even though I have personally experienced, if all you do is narcissistically pursue pleasure and power and the privileges of the false cathedral of the evil one that we now have normalized and regard to be ordinary life, fame, celebrity, materialism, rationalism, commodification, commerce, all of that. When I've broken out of it by an almighty slap from the Heavenly Father, I don't re-enter into it with the kind of idea that, oh, this will be good for me and this will pay dividends one day. It's like, I live only in you. Allow me to become a living sacrifice, continually renew my mind, live in me, my heavenly Father. Now I will change and I will become absolutely what he wants me to become. But it isn't in order that because if it is absolutely in the moment, it is.
Right, so you're saying that it can't just be grounded in a more enlightened form of what would say self-service. Yeah, okay, so
it's not a technique.
Yep, got it. So, some of the things that were occurring to me when you said that. So, there's a dream that Tolstoy had and recounted at the end of his confession. He was in a kind of suicidal despair, and he had a dream that he was suspended on a bed, and he was looking down like in immensely high above the earth, and he was looking down into this abyss that he could fall into, and then he looked up and he could see a rope that connected him to heaven, but he couldn't see what it was attached to. But he understood that rope that disappeared into the ineffable was what was protecting him from, like eternally, so to speak, from plunging into the abyss. And one of the things you're making reference to is the fact that because you're finite, let's say, and not omniscient, that your conceptualizations are always going to ground themselves out in something that is truly ineffable. Now, the same problem obtains in science, right? Because if you pursue your investigations into the micro world, you ground out in the quantum world, which no one understands. And then if you pursue your investigation temporally and you encounter the Big Bang, you're stuck with the miracle at the beginning of time. And I think part of it is, and Jung made some reference to this, is like if you're finite and bounded in your intelligence and your apprehension, there's a cloud of like mystery that surrounds that's dreamlike, and then there's something that's akin to the miraculous around that, and that's the buffer between the finite and the infinite. And I think you're making reference to that when you talk about the danger of reducing religious faith to the rational, even if you're assuming future orientation and communal orientation as a better rational orientation than present whim gratification. And I think that's right. I mean, that's partly, I think, why Orthodox Christianity is exerting a fairly powerful attraction on people at the moment, because it's quite good at using architecture and ritual and sound to fill the gap between the rational and the irrational, right? And it's not argumentation any more than ballet is argumentation.
I think that's a really interesting observation, and I'm gonna have to think about it more. But I think he's probably right in that observation.
Fine art is argumentation. It's more like it's a phenomena that. And that means to shine forth, right? It's a phenomena that indicates that there's something beyond what you normally apprehend.
And I said, which video am I going to release first? The Larry Sanger video. What I see happening in, let's say, overall numbers for Orthodoxy and Catholicism remain in decline, even though there is a movement into Orthodoxy and a movement into traditional Catholicism in the West. And I think because of what Jordan said, but I think a lot of that tends to be a minority of people, often with fairly high IQs. They are artists, they are intellectuals, and they are finding that in liturgy, they're finding it in symbolism and archetypes. I think Jordan's right in there. I think the masses, when you look at the evangelization of Africa, when you look at the evangelization of common people, they are finding that contact with the mysterious, the ineffable, the miraculous. They are tending to find that much more in, when I say Pentecostalism, in charismatic, in registers that are less refined artistically and more accessible in terms of populism. I'll say it that way.
And that's there, and that a relationship with that is necessary. And I do think that's, now you associated that discovery in you with despair. So, like, can you fill in the gaps between the despair and the discovery of that? What would you say? It's partly humility. It's partly apprehension of the necessity.
Now, Jordan in this, he's not having any of the trouble with interrupting Russell or not letting Russell speak. Again, I've noted many times that for Jordan, status seems, I mean, if Jordan is talking to a someone that, at least in Jordan's mind, is of high status, he'll tend to interrupt less and be more patient. But he's also, I think, in some ways studying Russell, because Jordan seems often curious at religious transformations, and so to see it in someone like Russell, who had a very hedonistic past, and Russell, who is obviously quite unusual in terms of his giftedness in a variety of ways, he's an interesting subject.
Of accepting things that are beyond your rational reductionism.
You have something of precise life, dark call of into
Material components of reality and the largest expanse conceivable of time, the origin of time as we might understand it, are enshrined in an unknowable, ineffable mystery. Perhaps in our own fractal reality, in the my little personal cosmos with its own hierophanies. I see, I did read that book.
Yeah.
I have encountered in various ways those edgelands. Now, any genius, whether it's in a scientific discipline, a sport, or arts, are trying to find that edge. And in so doing, occasionally in their renderings, will come up with some concert, landscape.
Okay, I think this is, again, you go back to Northwestuary, and you can go back to the plenary sessions at Northwestuary, when Karen Wong had this conversation with someone and they said, you know, at what point do you discover that milk has no bottom and paint has no bottom and hair has no bottom and these things have those? At some point you pay attention to the world long enough and you learn it long enough and you begin to realize that this world is not the flat material thing that we imagine it is, and the ineffable is somehow a mental abstraction from it, but rather the ineffable is beneath the world.
Trait or rhyme that is indicative of the perfection that underlies observable reality, that there is an absolute. Now, while in relationship, if the sort of culture is telling you, don't be in this ordinary world of Gray's Essex with its sort of endless tedium and its sort of trash glamour and its post-proletariat denim bleed into nothing. Aspire you to the upper echelons, to the great Vatican now in flames. There you will find salvation. But we know what prophets and what idols speak from those hills now incandescent. And when you get there, and if you had experience with all that stuff, if you sort of sleep around, like most people probably, Jordan, that sort of like live a life, I don't know about most people, some people maybe, like they're like, I live a pretty chaste life, but,
Well, part of, again, what happened at the art conference was I was able to bring Jordan Hall and I almost called him by the wrong name, Andy Wilkins, together, because they both also had that experience of, you get to the height, to the upper echelons, and you realize you thought that when you get that high, you would discover brilliance and superior levels of, and you will find sometimes really amazing, superior people up there, but often not.
As we have discussed before, and as you've touched upon on innumerable occasions. Well, have you ever been offered? Did you receive an offer to the banquet? Do you know what it's like?
Have you been presented with any temptation to resist?
Have you known that temptation? And when you are, and it's not, it is the false defibrillation of his kingdom. You can achieve something there in the false light of the Enlightenment that built out that new template where man sits at the apex. Lucifer himself, if the original sin of disobedience is knowledge apart from him or them, depending on how you see it, Lucifer is cast out and falls from heaven like lightning precisely because he sees himself as a competitor, opponent, and alternative to the divine. Now, I believe that is the archetype of selfishness. That's its germ and germination.
It's selfishness replete with the most sophisticated of all possible rationalizations. So it's the what would you say, supreme intellect as handmaiden of the passions. Right.
Yes.
So it's that grip of instantaneous motivation allied with, this is Foucault to a T, as far as I'm concerned. He put his entire intellect at the service of his warped passion.
Diabolical.
Yeah, diabolical. And he's very good at it. Like, he's very smart. He's very smart.
Great sophistry in this.
Marx did the same thing. Did the same thing. Yeah.
Why not? But like, it was the reason that I spoke about that, the despair as being the rupture, as being the point of epiphany, is because I suppose I've been taken to the very edge of it. My own post, I'm not claiming this is objective or absolute. I'm claiming the precisely the opposite. It's entirely subjective, of course. But I went as far as I could go, not only with the hedonism, the Epicureanism, but also with the, oh, look, you've got a family now and a dog and a thatched cottage and you live by the river. And it's all I've tried all of it. And then somehow lurking in the past, those two serpents that I had adored, my own personal Baal and Moloch, fame and sex, turned. When I was trying to live, even within the purview of the culture, a somewhat truthful and honest life. Hey, this pandemic don't seem right. They're not telling us the truth about the origins of this war. I don't think you can trust these people. What's the relationship between the media and these organisations and da-da-da? And you can't trust, and liberalism itself is a kind of godless ideology. This was when those two serpents turned. Now, I already felt that I was kind of an awakened person. I kind of felt like I was kind of clever. I'd not long but held a festival where rather brilliant people like Vandana Shiva and Wim Hof and Cali Means, sort of brilliant people had turned up, and I had marched about the grounds holding a staff, chanting Ragnarok with a bunch of pagans down there by some river, the river, in fact, that serves as a border between Wales, the Celtic wilds, and England, the stable centre. And not long after that, everything fell apart and I was exposed to so much sin. And sin, I think, here's a good near acronym, in self. The stands for self, the sibilant serpent self, in self. Now, because my background is in addiction and chemical dependency and behavioral dependency, I can see that what you do is, as well as that sort of mosaic that we keep referencing to of a kind of black mass of transubstantiation, placing desire where the center should be, no wonder it cannot hold. That whilst as a kind of a cardinal of that dark worship, while considering myself to be awakened, of course, because, you have to normalize these things, you have to deify these. No one's going around macabrely claiming, I am evil. Everyone thinks they're doing the right thing. It's either banal, it's either the banality of evil or the celebration of the evil, or the invisibility of evil, because it's so immersive and absolute and so far-reaching. So with my identity fell apart. My identity fell apart peculiarly at the exact same, because it's like Russell Brand is not a famous womanizer. Russell Brand is a famous rapist. That's what Russell... What? Look at him standing on stage making these jokes. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Being able to direct people's will is not the same as overcoming their will or ignoring their will or coercing them. Is precisely the opposite. Having the ability to direct people's will or charm or seduce or enchant, these are all sort of shamanic, magical kind of qualities that, yes, I now see where they lead. Thank you for the lesson, Lord. I now see where they lead. And I also now know absolutely, and look at what's happening in my country right now, falling apart with a kind of an extraordinary subterranean, potentially barbarian culture of gang rape. What's going on? It is like Old Testament stuff. So my despair came when what I had built, what I had made for myself, my false idol, not, like over my life, I've carved this thing, this image of Russell, and look at it, it can be destroyed. It can be destroyed in a half hour.
One of the strange things I think about your situation is that, you were, God, maybe this is probably right, is that you were, just like Richard Dawkins is the exemplar of the atheistic enlightenment, you're kind of the success story of the hedonistic liberal, right? I mean, you got, like, assuming that would work, what you got, was it working? Okay, so then the question is, well, if you get what you asked for, like if it's magically granted to you, as it was in your case, what's the consequence of that? And you're outlining the consequence. So you said, well, there were practical consequences that it inverted on you. But I'm also interested in the psychological consequences, because the question, well, why not take pleasure-enhancing drugs like cocaine? Why not sleep with everyone who presents themselves as an opportunity? Like, that's an actual question,
yes,
right?
It is a good question.
Generally, the reason is, well, you can't, right? You just don't have the opportunity. But then let's assume that,
you can.
Well, that
I did it.
Okay, and then, but why? Can you be more specific about why that didn't work psychologically?
I can, but it's in the despair holds the key, because I believe that was the communion and the communication that simultaneous with that, like while, people were, like friends and enemies were calling me, and you among the friends, like, let's say, like, God, are you okay? This is crazy. What was also happening is we were taking our son, who was 12 weeks old, to have his body carved almost in half, his heart taken out of his body. Like that was happening at the same time. So it was like, well, for all of the Sturm and Drang and the meteorological operatics of this conjured and concocted storm, which no doubt I provided the raw material for by being the poster boy of liberal hedonism, it's sort of, the Lord showed me, this is meaningless. This is meaningless. And I'll show you it's meaningless. Look what's actually happening right now. Look at your son. Look at the rain falling on his gentle face as you push the pram to Great Ormond Street. Look at his tiny smile. Look at the breast milk coming through his mother's T-shirt because she can't feed him because he has surgery in a few hours. So you tell me what's real. What did it do for you? Where did it get you?
This powerful, powerful story. And I like how you sort of have the public image and then you have the private moment. And once again, you have the reality that becoming a father or becoming a mother is a deeply transformative experience, because you see life in a very different way because of it. Now, there's a piece in this thing that I wanted to get to, and I haven't heard it yet. What often happens in many of these things is that there'll be something is said, and say the first run through it, or I've listened to this a couple of times, that something is said and it sort of sticks in my mind, and then something comes up and it comes back to that thing, and it comes back to that thing, and it has to do with I'll let this speech play out, and then maybe I'll go looking for it.
What does it mean? And there he is, Jesus Christ, and there he isn't, Russell Brand. What good did he do you? For all of your worship, for all of your effort, for all of the poetry, the prose, the posturing, the preening and primping, where did it lead you? Nothingness. Welcome to the annihilation. What you learn in crisis is true anyway. It's true anyway, but you just ignored it with all of the ornamentation and pageantry. You were able to distract yourself from it so marvelously. So psychologically, what happens is a massive rupture. And you realise also, by the way, because you're in Great Ormond Street, when the most important thing in your life is happening to you, that your son is undergoing surgery and he might not survive the surgery, so is everyone else's kid. So is everyone else's kid. Who do you think you are? Because when it came in the scan, at 26 weeks prior to his birth, I was like, I'm not having that, Laura. I'm not having that. I'm not having some kid with tubes up his nose and wires. I'm not going to Great Ormond Street. But when you get to Great Ormond Street through surrender, who are you saying? oh my God, something says, who are you to not go to Great Ormond Street? Who are you? Who do you think you are? You're not who you think you are. You're not who you thought you were. And the trials and the tests are not punishments, but lessons, as he strips it all away and he takes it away from you and he shows you who you are really and what you are here to do really. So,
yeah. See if I can find that piece. That's powerful, powerful section. I'll have to find it another time because I want to find it again because sometimes what sticks in my head is not exactly what's there. It's the thought that whatever's there prompted in my head and it's still too vague and I don't want to lose it. But yeah, I mean, this was a powerful conversation and it was a powerful testimony as to, I think it's a powerful illustration of transformation. Now, of course, what happens with Brand down the road, none of us know, but it was really, I was quite moved. It was quite powerful. So, yeah, not maybe you think not enough commentary in this compared to what I usually do, but Brand gets flowing so well. I sort of don't want to interrupt him. So anyway, leave a comment.